MZTV.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the country of Syria has fallen into the hands of, a group called HTS. Probably stands for happy, thoughtful, and super peaceful. So, not to worry. Because every time the U.S. gets its grimy fingers involved in foreign affairs and we try to make things better, we always make things worse. But in the process of making things worse, things do get worse, but the worseness is producing an amazing phenomenon around the world, which is the creation of theocracies. And this is, for those of us who can't wait to get off of this planet and for the tribulation to begin, this is one of the greatest signs I've seen in a long time. And I am going to get into some of the details with you here today on MZTV. I'm Martin Zender, and welcome to the show. I know you long with me to see the world stage come to the culmination prophesied in the scripture. Mainly what we're looking at here is the four major religions of the earth becoming mingled with a state where it's ideal to have church and state separate. Now we're seeing the formation of things that were thought to be totally relegated to history, which is the formation of religion states. And as we see the U.S. political situation becoming more religionized, we're also seeing the same thing happening in the Middle East and in China, in India, even in Russia, if you can believe it. So there are two scripture passages which say that Damascus, which is the capital of Syria, will be utterly destroyed and uninhabited. This is remarkable because Damascus is one of the oldest cities in the world, and it's always been inhabited. Damascus, you'll remember, is the city that our beloved apostle was heading to in his Pharisaic phase, was heading to Damascus. He eventually got to Damascus, but he got there a changed man. I really despise these world political situations. I don't get too deeply into them. I refuse to get too deeply into them. And that's good because I'm able that way to keep a very broad picture, an aerial view for you. I can keep my childlike mind and not become a foreign policy expert because I'm the farthest thing from that, but I do pay attention to what's going on. And I think God has given me the ability to assess these complicated things in the most simple way possible. So is the political situation in Syria now being set up for Damascus to be destroyed? I say yes. And as I said, every time the U.S. gets involved in trying to topple what they would call a bad dictator, something worse takes its place. This happened with Muammar Gaddafi. It happened with the Shah of Iran back in the 70s. It happened with Gaddafi. It happened with Saddam Hussein. And now the U.S. thinks that because Assad, the leader of Syria, who admittedly is a thug, terrible guy, all these people I just mentioned were not great people. But the problem is, by us trying to fix the political situations in other countries, we create vacuums that are then taken over by even more malevolent forces. It just happens again and again. Because the new leader of Syria, a guy named Abu Muhammad al-Julani, has ties to both ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Oh, but we're going to wait and see because this might be a great thing. It might be a wonderful leader. He may bring unity to the entire Middle East. But what I think is going to happen is that it's going to be a consolidation of radical Islamicists, because it will become an infection of terrorism. And I think the stage is being set for that. Now, I'm going to link you to a video here by a commentator named Dr. Steve Turley. I think this man's a really good political commentator. He's a religious guy, but I mean, he really sticks to politics for the most part. But he makes some really astute observations. I would really recommend his site. He got everything right as far as the last election went. And he says that there's a reawakening around the world of an ancient form of government known as, of course, theocracy, where a religion dictates the political processes and the political fortunes of a country. In this video, he talks about a worldwide return to theocracy. And the reason this is fascinating to me, and the reason I was just electrified to hear this, is because of, again, the prophecy of Daniel chapter 7. I keep going back to that. It's so important. The 4 beasts that Daniel saw coming out of the sea. And the main hesitation people have had with the interpretation that these are indeed 4 religions and not 4 political blocks is the use of the word kingdom. Now, I'm not going to go through the 4 beasts again and why the description of these beasts fit to a T. The 4 major religions of the earth: Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, and Christianity. I've done that many times before. If you want to find out more, just put my name in the search box in YouTube and type in the 4 beasts. You'll find several videos on this topic. But Daniel inquires as to the meaning of the beast. Verse 15 of Daniel 7, "As for me, Daniel, my spirit was perturbed within its sheath." Wow, I love this picturesque language. "And the visions of my head were flustering me. I drew near to one of those standing by." One of the spiritual beings come to illumine Daniel, and I petitioned him for the true meaning of all this. Then he spoke to me and made the interpretation of the matters known to me. These monstrous animals, the lioness, the she-bear, the leopardess, and the indistinct animal called in the concordant version a monstrous. The 4 of them are 4 kingdoms that shall rise from the earth. And again, the description of these animals, starting with verse 1 of chapter 7, fits the 4 major, and there are only 4 major religions on the earth. And people have had a problem with calling them kingdoms, but I refer you to Revelation chapter 9, speaking of Abaddon, who is a demonic spirit who is called the king of the locusts of the submerged chaos, the locusts that will come forth from the earth during the tribulation to torment the inhabitants of the earth for 5 months. They have a king over them. And his name is Abaddon. He's a spiritual being. Not like Abu here, the new leader of Syria, who's going to be a real nice guy, peaceful guy. He's going to unify the country and the surrounding area, no doubt. It's going to be a beautiful situation. The State Department is keeping a close eye on it to see how his behavior matches up with his pledge to be a unifier of sorts. Okay, we'll see how that goes. Well, I'm pretty sure I already know how it's going to go. But Abaddon is said to be a king. And so if we're looking at these religions on earth, you might say, well, I don't see a king. These religions don't have a king speaks of a political ruler. Where are the kings of these religions? These religions don't have kings. They have priests, they have imams, they have pastors, they have popes. But these religions are instigated by, supported by, fueled by 4 spirits. Daniel sees 4 spirits coming out of the sea. And so, even as Paul says that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but with the sovereignties and authorities, the world mights of darkness, Likewise, these religions, if you really want to know their source and who's running them, you don't look at the earthly heads, you look at the spiritual heads. And as Abaddon is called a king, in Revelation chapter 9, likewise, the malevolent spiritual beings that run the four major religions of the earth, including Christianity, it's the fourth beast of Daniel chapter 7, they are also kings. They operate as kings. They manipulate these religions like kings. To them, it's political. It may appear religious on the surface of the earth, but behind the scenes, it is political as far as the spiritual beings operating it go. However, even so, it looks like the world is actually, on the surface of the earth, the human beings running these things, it looks like they are becoming kingdoms. Watch this video. It is fascinating. According to Dr. Steve Turley, he says theocracies are seeing a, quote, remarkable resurgence. He calls it constitutional theocracies, in that it is monitored or tempered by some sort of constitution. I didn't know this, but India is becoming more and more a religious government. It's called Hindutva. It's the Hindu form of Sharia law. India is the main carrier, proponent of the Hindu religion. And I certainly didn't realize that China, like, you can't tell me, Martin, that Xi, the president of China, is religious. So China is experiencing a revival of Confucianism. Now, I don't want you to confuse Confucianism with Buddhism, which is the chief religion of China and environs. I did some research on it today, which was very painful. I hate this stuff. Confucianism is more of a philosophy. It has some overlap with Buddhism. But since Paul hates philosophy, he says, forget about it. And since the four beasts of Daniel 7 are religions, I'm going to tell you, Martin Zender, I'm going to tell you that just consider Confucianism to be part of the Buddhist religion. However much people might want to distinguish between the philosophy and the religion, it's all one big bag of crap. Sorry if I've offended any Buddhists out there. I say the same thing about Christianity, so I'm an equal opportunity offender. Can you believe it? The president of China, Xi Jinping, is overseeing a revival of Confucianism, which is so closely tied to Buddhism that you really can't tell the difference. And people argue about the difference. And in fact, the old communism is being replaced by religion. Is it because it's more palatable, or it feels softer but accomplishes the same control of people? Maybe these leaders are realizing that if we amalgamate religion, if we tie religion closer to politics, we can control more people. We don't need tanks, because people are much more worshipful. They're much more obedient to religions. They can be ensnared much more efficiently by religions than they can by gulags. And I think apparently these leaders are realizing it. Even Vladimir Putin. Yeah, you got to watch this video to believe it. Putin has something called politics of the sacred. It's a revivified Russia as an Orthodox nation. Putin? Orthodox Russia? What? All of this, as we see the Middle East becoming, well, more unified, yes, but not in a good way, more unified as a terrorist state that the next president of the United States has pledged to destroy. And how interesting that Damascus, being the capital of Syria, is prophesied to be destroyed in Isaiah 17 and Jeremiah chapter 49. I think Daniel chapter 7 is being uber fulfilled today, as these four great sections of the earth, the Far East, China, the Near East, India, the Middle East, Syria, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the like, and the West, Europe and America, are becoming centralized around religion. I know you can see it clearly in the U.S. with the Trump movement. I love the Trump movement. I'm MAGA all the way. Love it. But as we've been talking about, it's going to become the beast of Revelation. If you read Revelation 13, chapter 1, and it was standing on the sand of the sea, and I perceived a wild beast ascending out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on its horns 10 diadems, and on its heads blasphemous names. Verse 2, Revelation 13. And the wild beast which I perceived was like a leopardess, and its feet were as a bear's, and its mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gives it its power, and its throne, and great authority. This amalgamated beast takes the individual beasts of Daniel chapter 7 and brings them all together. Remember, the beasts of Daniel chapter 7 were a lioness, a she-bear, a leopardess, and an indistinct beast called a monstrous. What do we have here? We have one beast called the wild beast. It was like a leopardess, Islam. Its feet were as a bear's, Hinduism, and its mouth as the mouth of a lion, Buddhism. And the dragon, the Western beast, gives it its power. Also, Satan gives it its power and its throne and great authority. These are religions, and yet they are found to be having authority. This is the ultimate wiping away of the difference between church and state. The separation of church and state is being buried. These lines are being blurred. But the Western beast is going to, let's go back at the end of this show, let's go back to Daniel 7, and I'll show you how the Western beast is going to stamp out the Eastern beast. As these religions in these four parts of the world become more powerful, I should say these eastern parts of the world become more centralized and more powerful and more religious, the West is going to feel intimidated by them, especially by the Islamic religion, which is the most mobile, the most violent, the most powerful. And they're going to stamp them out. Verse 23, Daniel 7, as for the fourth animal, there shall come to be a fourth kingdom on the earth that is diverse from all the other kingdoms. She shall devour the entire earth and thresh it and crush it. And as for the 10 horns, these are 10 political powers within the Western beast. From this kingdom shall 10 kings, there you go, arise, and another one shall arise after them. He is diverse from the eastern ones. The eastern ones, this is the great revelation found in the concordant version of the Old Testament. The eastern beasts. In Daniel chapter 7, at the beginning, the King James says, and the first beast was a lioness. But the concordant version says the eastern beast was a lioness. And amazingly, folks, these religions, as depicted by these beasts, go from east to west. Buddhism, the Far East, Hinduism, the Near East, Islam, the Middle East, and Christianity, the West. He is diverse from the eastern ones, and he shall abase 3 kings. Declarations against the supreme. Against the supreme. Why would a political entity make declarations against the supreme, that is God? Because this is at its core spiritual. It is at its core religious, and is becoming more and more that even as I speak. Declarations against the supreme shall he declare to the saints. Of the supremacy shall he bring decay. He shall intend to alter stated times and an edict. And on we go. I want to go back to verse 19, Daniel chapter 7. As Daniel says to the celestial messenger, I wanted to know the true meaning concerning the fourth animal that was diverse from them all and exceedingly terrifying. This is the Christian religion, which is armed to the teeth. Speaking of teeth, her teeth were of iron, her claws of copper. She was devouring and crushing and stamping upon the remainder with her feet. Stamping upon the remainder. That is the other three religious blocks, formerly political blocks, but now becoming more and more religious blocks. Devouring, crushing, and stamping upon the remainder with her feet. Also concerning the 10 horns that were on her head, that is the 10 kings that formed this western beast, and concerning another horn that came up, and before it the 3 fell. And for this horn it had eyes also and a mouth declaring monstrous things. This will be the Antichrist, a man of lawlessness. And the sight of it was larger than its fellows. I was perceiving, verse 21, that the same horn was making an attack on the saints. The saints. What does a political interest have to do with saints? These political interests are becoming more and more spiritual. Theocracies are on the rise. This is a divine movement. God is inspiring this. It's happening quickly. I knew it was happening in the West, but I suspected it was happening in the Middle East. And I see it happening even more with the fall of Syria and the takeover by a supposedly more moderate group, but that's not going to happen. But little did I realize that India, even though Hinduism is a caste system and the Brahmins have great political clout, but this is becoming even more pronounced. And now you're telling me that Xi and Putin are realigning their countries to revert to ancient theocracies? This is mind-blowing. But this is some of the best news that you and I could hear.